Finally, in this section on learning and development, we're going to look at a far more modern approach to studying infant development. And this specifically is a project that comes out of MIT Media Lab. It's called the Human Speechome Project, and the name is a direct reference, as it were, to the ambitions of the Human Genome Project. And it follows a long line of venerable tradition, really, of scientists studying their own children. Darwin did this, Freud did this, Piaget did this, and we're going to look at the work of Deb Roy. Deb Roy initiated an ambitious program centered around studying the linguistic development of his firstborn son. The scale of the ambition here was unprecedented. He attempted to capture almost the entire linguistic output and environment, so both sides, for a child over 3 years. And this meant completely changing his home environment, installing video cameras in the ceilings of every room, microphones in the walls, a lot of kill switches to ensure privacy. The basement of the house was converted into a server farm, and the video cameras and microphones were streaming to that, which gave rise to an enormous amount of data. This was collected between 2005 and 2008. And even by contemporary standards, it's a huge amount of data. So we're talking 200 gigabytes a day, over 140,000 hours of audiovisual data. That first of all presents an enormous challenge, how to find anything in there. So this is what the view looks like from above. This is the kitchen. And we have a similar view from every room in the house. And then the question starts, what do you do with this kind of enormous data gathering exercise? So data had never been captured in this fashion before. And the answer is you go looking and you find out what you can find out. You have to, first of all, deal with the problem of segmentation, recognizing things, labeling things, identifying things in the data. And here's just one sample of the findings. This data set is still being analyzed. And what happened here is every single production of the child's word for water was captured. Now, as with many young children, the first utterance of this sounded nothing like water, and you have to be a caregiver. You have to enter into that empathic relationship with the child to know, but as any parent will tell you, that's not difficult. So the word for water originally came out as something like gaga, and then it changed over time. So what you can do with this data set is go through, find every single utterance, and then string them all back to back so that you can listen to the emerging sound of the word water, much as you might observe the growth of a plant, for example. Have a listen to this. He nailed it at the end. He got there. So this is a quite novel way of looking at human behavioral data. That followed the charted the development of one word, water. And there was a day on which the child first said gaga, meaning water. And let's call that day the birth of a word. So every word in the child's emerging vocabulary will appear someday for the first time. So there's a birthday for truck, and there's a birthday for bread, and so on. So one thing that became possible was to go through, for each word separately, to go and find where it was born, on which day did this word appear, and then look at sentences from the caregiver prior to the birth of the word and following the birth of the word. And when you do this and you align all these data, What you find is that the complexity of the sentences that caregivers are using are finely tuned to the emerging linguistic capacities of the child. So sentences containing a word that has not yet been born will gradually simplify until the point at which the word is born and then take off again. So the data there and the plot are aligned at 0. 0 is a different point in time for every word, but the 0 point is the day on which the word first appears. And a very simple measure of sentence complexity, which is just the number of words in the sentence containing that word, from the caregivers are shown. Now, this is quite remarkable. Nobody could be aware of this going on. This is happening for each word on a different timescale. So there's no consciousness or overt pedagogy going on here. What this instead shows is that there is a sensitive interdependence between the capacities of the child and the behavior of the caregivers. The caregivers are exquisitely sensitive to the capacities of the child. Now, on the one hand, this might remind us of Lev Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, because what's seen here is that the words are emerging in a joint context to which the caregiver contributes very, very sensitively. And later on, of course, the words become internalized, and now the child has command of the word and can use it. So this is a almost literal illustration of the notion of a zone of proximal development. Another reason this might give us pause for thought is the centrality of a specific argument that has been made by Chomsky and others in motivating the agenda of generative grammar, and that has become known as the poverty of the stimulus argument. We've met this before. This is an armchair argument cooked up by thinking men, always men, which suggests that the environment of a child is simply too poor to support language learning from scratch, and that therefore an awful lot needs to be built in. Looking at this, we can see that this is wrong. What we can see is that the environment of a child is in sensitive interaction with the capacities of the child, and to attribute the emerging linguistic capacity of the child solely to something that is built in, hardwired, instinctual, innate, is to be blind to the richness of the intersubjective conditions under which children learn language. So very important work here. You can sample audio as we did for the word water. Just to give you an idea of what else one might do with a data set like this, here's audio-visual sampling, this time of the word ball.
Blue ball, yeah.
So this allows us to observe not only how productions change over time, but to also ask questions about linguistic geography. Where is a word used? It turns out that words don't occur freely everywhere. Words are used in specific contexts, and those are spatial contexts, temporal contexts, linguistic contexts, intersubjective contexts. And this dependence of context on the likelihood of a word being used plays a very important role in learning. And it suggests that when a child is learning, they're not simply learning an abstract vocabulary, they're learning to be language users in specific situations. The multimodal context of word learning for one child greatly supports the introduction to how language works. the data set that's provided here with this Human Speech Own project gives an entirely new way of looking at this dependence between word use and context. Here, for example, are some overviews of where and when specific words are used and what the context is. So on the left-hand side, you can see a plan of the house in which the observations were made. The rooms are labeled in the top left-hand corner, and blue indicates less likelihood of occurrence of a word, and red indicates increased likelihood. So we can see, for example, that the word breakfast occurs primarily in the kitchen. No big surprise there, right? We're finding out some fairly obvious things here. The word fish occurs mainly in the child's room. Why? Well, this is a specific child. That's where this word happens for this particular infant. Looking at the second column, you have the likelihood by hour of day, and you can see that, again, unsurprisingly, breakfast occurs at a specific time of day, whereas the word car occurs throughout the day. The right-hand column shows the terms which co-occur with the word. So whenever beautiful comes up, we've got themes to do with, well, it's rather a mixed bag. Interpreting these is difficult. Certainly when fish comes up, words like turtle, cat, hat, crab, star, twinkle, moon, dreams merrily are around, showing that these words are linked. They're not free-floating words. They're occurring in context here, linguistic context, together with nursery rhymes and so on. And we can do this for many words. Look at the distribution of the word kick here. Kick occurs in the hall and towards the front of the house, almost exclusively. Whereas a word like with shows no particular distribution. The bottom word here is with, and it seems to occur equally throughout the space of the house and throughout the time in which the child is awake. So this opens our eyes to language in context, and it might lead us to avoid a lot of simplistic presuppositions about what's going on in child learning. It pays to look. So the Human Speech Own project gave us for the first time the direct observation of the linguistic environment of the child. And with that, it directly bears relevance to the centrality of this poverty of the stimulus claim, and shows that the situation is vastly more complicated than was previously thought, and awakens us to the need to understand language use as deeply embedded in practices in everyday living, in places and with times and for purposes. So the study of the development of young infants goes on. It's still a difficult topic, and there's lots of surprises still in store.